The rain was heavier than it had been in weeks. Thick drops slashed the pavement, and the city streets were already beginning to flood. Beneath the dim glow of a flickering street lamp, a small figure huddled alone, shivering from both fear and cold. It wasn't just the weather that made this moment unbearable. It was the absolute stillness around him. The world didn't seem to care that he was there, abandoned and alone, drenched to the bone in a puddle of mud and tears. A puppy, just barely more than a scrap of fur, lay curled on the curb, his tiny body shaking uncontrollably. His heart raced, yet something in his bones told him he had no place to go. The sound of distant tires splashing in the water only reminded him how small he was in this city, how forgotten he seemed. The puppy's eyes glistened in the darkness, wide and trusting, but there was no one to answer that trust. He whimpered, his small body jerking with each sob, but his voice was swallowed up by the pounding rain. "Please," he whispered, not even sure what he was asking for. His breath misted in front of him, but even in the chaos, he had a single thought: he was going to die here. The rain didn't care about him. The world didn't care about him. His small body shivered, and then he closed his eyes, too tired to fight anymore. But then in the distance, he heard something. Tires screeched. A door opened. Footsteps splashed through the puddles. Someone had seen him, and they were coming. The rain hadn't stopped. It fell as though the sky had opened up, determined to wash everything away. The small puppy, he hadn't even been named yet, sat, trembling by the curb, eyes locked onto the shadowy silhouette across the street. A car had passed, and with it, a figure had stopped. A tall man with dark hair and a heavy coat, who had looked right through the small creature before turning to go. But the puppy had caught the flicker of hesitation in his movement. The brief pause where his foot hadn't quite left the ground, like he had been questioning whether he should keep going or not. And then, as quickly as he had appeared, the figure was gone, swallowed by the rain and the night. The puppy whimpered, curling himself tighter into the mud. It was getting harder to breathe, harder to stay conscious. But something pulled at him. A strange, stubborn thing deep inside, something primal. He couldn't just die here. He couldn't just give up. As the minutes passed, his mind grew numb with exhaustion, but there was a feeling still gnawing at him. It wasn't fear. It wasn't sadness. It was something else, something sharp, like the cold wind cutting through his thin fur. It was hope. The kind that comes when you have no other choice. When you hold on because that's the only thing you know how to do. He fought the weakness in his body, even when it felt impossible. Then he heard it again. A car, tires swishing through the puddles. This time, the silhouette didn't vanish. The man was coming closer, and the puppy's heart beat faster, his tiny body trembling with the smallest flicker of belief that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't alone anymore. When Jason reached the curb, he could barely hear himself think over the sound of the rain pounding against the pavement. His clothes were already soaked, but he hardly noticed. What had made him stop? The puppy's eyes, wide and filled with a kind of innocence he hadn't seen in a long time. That was the moment he realized he wasn't just seeing a stray animal in need. He was looking at something, someone who was holding on to life by a thread, just like him. The man knelt down in the puddle beside the puppy, feeling the cold seep into his knees. He reached out slowly, trying not to spook the dog. The puppy didn't flinch. It let out a soft whimper, as if it was unsure whether it should trust this person. But Jason, with his rough hands so unused to tenderness, didn't hesitate. He scooped the little thing into his arms, feeling the tiny ribs beneath the soaked fur. "Hey there, little guy," Jason murmured, though his voice was barely audible over the storm. "It's okay, I'm here now. You're safe." It felt absurd, talking to the puppy as though he could understand. But for a brief moment, it didn't matter. Jason could feel the fragile creature's pulse against his chest, each heartbeat like a reminder that life was precious. And in that moment, as he held the trembling puppy, something inside him softened. The numbness he had carried for so long seemed to melt away. The car ride felt like hours, though it was only a matter of minutes. Jason held the puppy close, trying to shield it from the relentless rain by wrapping his jacket around them both. He drove slowly, eyes flicking between the road and the small creature in his lap, who had stopped shivering, though it was still wide-eyed, confused. The city around him felt less like home than ever before. Too many lights, too many people, but no one who cared. He drove into the quiet suburbs, the houses now shadowed under the weight of the storm. When he pulled into his driveway, Jason sighed, looking at the small creature nestled in his arms. He wasn't much of a dog person. He didn't even know if he could take care of a puppy. He was struggling with his own demons, his own battles that had worn him down over the years. But as the puppy blinked at him with those trusting eyes, something shifted within him. For the first time in a long while, Jason realized he didn't have to face everything alone. Maybe, just maybe, this small creature needed him as much as he needed it. As he opened the door to his modest home, he gently placed the puppy on the couch, his fingers trembling as he moved. He'd never been good at making decisions. He'd always hesitated, doubted himself. But as the puppy curled into the warmth of the blanket, Jason found himself making a promise. No more hesitation. No more doubt. He would do whatever it took to keep this little life safe. Days turned into weeks, and the puppy, whom Jason named Max, grew stronger with each passing day. The storm outside was just a memory, replaced by the warmth of an unexpected companionship. Jason learned the rhythms of caring for Max, from the late night feedings to the early morning walks in the park. He laughed at how clumsy he was at first, stumbling through basic training and trying to teach Max how to sit or stay. But each small victory, each moment of connection, felt like a step forward for both of them. Jason had begun to notice something about himself too. He wasn't so lost in his own mind anymore. He found himself caring about the small things. The sound of Max's paws clicking on the floor, the way the puppy's eyes softened when Jason sat down beside him. He realized, with a small, quiet awe, that the world around him wasn't as dark as it used to be. Max had reminded him of something. He wasn't just a man trying to survive. He was someone who could give love, who could heal. And in that healing, Jason started to realize that it wasn't just the puppy who had saved him. It was Max's resilience, his need for care, that had pulled Jason back from the brink. He didn't know how to explain it, but the love they shared was something that could never be described in simple words. It was a kind of rebirth, a recognition that no life was too small to matter. Months later, the storm had passed, and the city looked almost peaceful again. Jason sat on his porch one quiet evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, casting long shadows over the yard. Max was at his feet, sleeping soundly, his small body curled in a ball. But Jason's thoughts drifted, as they often did, to the past. The years of pain and isolation that had led him to that very moment. The years where he thought he was just surviving, just getting through each day. But now, as he looked at Max, Jason understood. Survival wasn't enough. You had to live. And maybe, in some strange way, the puppy had been the one to show him that. Without realizing it, Max had healed something inside of him that had been broken for a long time. Jason felt a lump in his throat, the weight of all those years of loneliness finally lifting. When he stood up, Max stirred, blinking up at him with wide eyes full of trust. Jason crouched down, meeting those eyes one last time, and he whispered, almost as if the storm had never happened, "You saved me." And this time, the world outside didn't seem so cold. The sky, calm and clear, held no more threats. There was no rain, no flooding. Just the peacefulness that comes after the storm. Jason stood there, his heart strangely full, feeling the cool evening breeze on his skin. It was quiet now in a way that felt sacred. Max stretched, yawning softly, as if the world hadn't been a place of chaos just months before. Jason's mind wandered back to the first time he'd seen those terrified eyes, how he'd almost walked past, too afraid to get involved, to feel the weight of responsibility. But now, looking down at Max, he realized just how different his life had become. The quiet moments had become their moments. Max had taught him the art of patience, the power of silence. He never had to ask for anything but love, and in return Jason gave it with everything he had. In the evenings, they'd sit together, watching the world change outside their window, sharing the comfort of each other's presence. It was simple, but in a way, it was everything Jason had ever needed. He didn't feel alone anymore, not like before. Max had come to symbolize more than just a companion. He was a bridge to a new beginning. A new chapter. Each day, Jason found himself opening up, step by step, in ways he never had. It wasn't just about feeding, walking, and playing with the dog. It was about letting himself feel again, letting himself believe that there was still good in the world, even after all the years of feeling lost. Max had been the first to teach him that life could still be gentle, even in the aftermath of everything. That even a small, fragile creature could bring the kind of calm that most people spent their whole lives searching for. But it wasn't all easy. There were moments when the memories would creep in, flashbacks of the dark days when Jason had been unsure, haunted by a past that seemed impossible to escape. There were still the late nights when he would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, asking himself why he'd allowed himself to go so far into the dark, why he hadn't let himself ask for help sooner. But then he'd hear the soft breathing of Max beside him, the steady rhythm of life that had returned to his chest, and he'd realize it didn't matter. He was here. They were here. And that was enough. It wasn't about fixing everything. It was about letting go of the weight of it all and finding peace in the smallest of moments. Jason wasn't perfect. He still struggled some days, lost in his thoughts, unsure of where he was heading. But Max had taught him that it was okay to not have all the answers. Some things, he realized, didn't need to be fixed. They just needed to be lived through. One evening, as they sat together on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, Jason ran his fingers gently through Max's fur. The puppy, now a young dog, looked up at him, eyes bright and full of wonder, tail thumping softly against the floor. Jason smiled, a real smile this time, one that carried no weight, no guilt, just a simple, honest happiness. Max let out a soft woof, as if to remind him, we're still here, together. And for the first time in a long time, Jason didn't feel the urge to run away from his past. He simply felt grateful for the moment, for the soft, steady pulse of life, and for the small miracle that had been waiting at the edge of a storm. The last remnants of daylight faded, but the warmth of the evening lingered. The world around them was calm, quiet. Max nuzzled against his leg, and Jason rested his head back against the chair, eyes closing, breathing in the peace they had found together. There were no more storms to fear, no more abandonment. The rain had stopped, and the world, in its own way, had healed. All that was left was the feeling of warmth, of a promise made without words, a promise to never let go. The nights had become their sanctuary, each one a testament to the bond they had forged in the storm's aftermath. The house, once dark and hollow, was now filled with a rhythm, a heartbeat that pulsed through the rooms with every step Max took. Jason would hear the soft tap of paws on the floor in the quiet moments of the night, the dog's restless energy finding its place in the home. In the mornings, the first sound he would hear was the soft rustling of Max's blanket, followed by the familiar, eager whine that signaled it was time for their walk. Jason's mornings no longer felt like a chore. They were a chance to start again, to take in the air that felt fresher now, cleaner, as if the world itself had taken a deep breath. But there were still days, fleeting and quiet, when the weight of it all would press down on him. The loss, the loneliness that lingered in corners of his mind, like the shadows that stretched long across the floor in the evenings. Max seemed to know when those days came. The puppies, no, the dogs, gentle presence would draw close, nudging at his hand, offering comfort in the only way he knew how. Sometimes the simple act of sitting together, silent and still, was enough to pull Jason from the depths of those dark moments. One such evening, Jason sat in his favorite chair, eyes lost in the distant lights of the city below. Max, ever faithful, laid by his feet, his head resting against Jason's leg. The room was bathed in the soft glow of the lamp, casting long shadows that curled like old memories. The world outside, the rain, the storm, it felt so far away now, like a dream. It was hard to believe that, not too long ago, he had been nothing but a ghost of a man, too afraid to reach out, too broken to believe in any kind of salvation. He'd been certain that the world had nothing left for him. But Max had changed that, bit by bit, just by being there, just by existing. Jason's fingers brushed through Max's through absently, feeling the warmth of the dog against his skin. The softness was a reminder that life, in all its mess and chaos, could still hold something pure. Max's presence, his simple need for care and love, had been the mirror Jason had needed to see himself in a new light. There was strength and softness, a kind of quiet resilience that Jason had never known existed. It wasn't always perfect, Sometimes Jason still struggled with his doubts. Sometimes the nights were long, and the weight of everything would crash over him like a wave he couldn't outrun. But he had learned something important, that it wasn't about escaping the storms. It was about learning to stand firm in them, knowing that you didn't have to face them alone. And for the first time in years, Jason wasn't afraid of the storm anymore. Max shifted beside him, lifting his head and gazing up at Jason, his eyes full of something almost human: trust, loyalty, understanding. Jason's heart skipped a beat, and without thinking, he leaned down to press his forehead gently against Max's. For a brief moment, everything else faded away. There were no past regrets, no future worries, just this one quiet moment. The love between them was not spoken. It was something felt deeply and quietly, in the spaces between their breaths. The sound of a car passing outside broke the spell, and Jason pulled away, blinking as if waking from a dream. Max wagged his tail softly, as if to say, "It's okay, we're here there." Jason smiled, a small, bittersweet smile. There was no need for grand gestures or sweeping declarations. The truth was simple, and it had always been simple. Max had given him a reason to believe in something bien, something beyond survival, beyond existing. It was hope, quiet but persistent, like the soft patter of rain on a window. He stood up, stretching his stiff limbs, and as he reached down to grab Max's leash, the dog bounded up, tail wagging enthusiastically. Even in the silence, even in the stillness of the night, there was something bright, something waiting. They stepped out into the cool night air, the city lights stretching far before them, endless and full of possibility. The storm might have passed, but they had learned to carry it within them, to move forward with it, not against it. And as they walked together, side by side, Jason realized something else, something that would stay with him for the rest of his life. He didn't need to have all the answers. He didn't need to be perfect. He only needed to keep walking, one step at a time, with Max at his side, through whatever storms life might still throw their way. And that, he thought, was enough. The sound of Max's paws hitting the pavement, steady and sure, became their rhythm. Their journey was far from over, but for the first time, Jason knew he wasn't facing it alone. No matter what came next, no matter how many storms were left to weather, there would always be that quiet, faithful presence at his side, grounding him in a way that nothing else ever had. And as they disappeared into the night, Jason couldn't help but smile. There was no more fear. There was only the calm after the storm and the promise of tomorrow. The days drifted forward like the gentle flow of a river, sometimes calm, sometimes rushing, but always moving ahead. Jason and Max, inseparable, carved out a life that felt unexpectedly full. There were moments, quiet ones, when Jason would look at Max and marvel at the bond they had forged. It was as though they had always been meant to find each other, as if the universe had conspired to bring them together. In that particular storm, on that particular night, Max had blossomed, no longer the shivering puppy abandoned in the rain. His coat had thickened, his body had grown strong and lean, and his eyes, those eyes, were full of life, full of love. And Jason, too, had changed. He had found something within himself that he never thought possible: confidence, purpose, a reason to keep moving forward, to keep fighting, even on days when the weight of the world felt like it would crush him. They spent afternoons at the park, where Max would run with wild abandon, his small form darting between the trees, his joy infectious. Jason would stand on the sidelines, a smile tugging at the corners of his lips, watching the dog run with all the freedom he had once wished for himself. There were days when the weight of his past would still press against him, when the shadows of old regrets would linger. But each time Max looked back at him, his tail wagging, eager to show Jason the world he had yet to discover, Jason felt that weight lift just a little more. It was in those moments, when Max, soaked and happy from a day of chasing squirrels, would come running back to him, panting with excitement, that Jason understood something essential. Max had not only saved his life, he had taught him how to live it. The dog's trust, so pure and unrelenting, had given Jason the courage to trust again. Not just in people, but in himself. Max and his guide out of the dark, the one who had shown him that the world still held beauty, still held possibility, even after everything he'd been through. But like all things, their journey was not without its challenges. there were still moments when Jason found himself faltering, unsure of his place in the world. There were nights when the silence felt too heavy, too vast, and there were still days when the echo of his past would tug at him, reminding him of the man he used to be. The man who had been lost, who had been consumed by fear and doubt. But even then, he had Max. He had the steady presence of a dog who had never once asked for anything but love. And that, in itself, was a kind of salvation. One evening, as they walked along their usual route, the sky above them painted in shades of violet and orange, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, Jason felt a shift within himself. He had come a long way since that rainy night, when he had found Max in the street, his tiny body cold and broken. They both had. The past was still there, a part of who they were, but it no longer defined them. They had moved beyond it step by step, and in doing so had found something more lasting than survival. Max trotted ahead, nose to the ground, tail wagging in that familiar, carefree way. Jason smiled as he watched him, feeling a profound sense of gratitude. He hadn't just saved a dog, he had saved himself. And in return, Max had given him the gift of love, of life, of moments like this one, simple, quiet, yet immeasurably precious. They reached their favorite spot by the old oak tree, where the grass was soft beneath their feet, and Jason sank down, leaning back against the trunk. Max curled up beside him, his body warm and solid against Jason's side. The world was quiet now, the evening air cool and filled with the sounds of the distant city. But in this small corner of it, there was peace. Jason looked down at Max, who gazed up at him with those unwavering eyes. The stars were starting to peek through the darkening sky, their light faint but steady. Jason's heart swelled, and for the first time in a long while, he felt truly content. The storm had long passed. The rain, the cold, the uncertainty, all of it had faded into memory. What remained was the quiet certainty of the life they had built together, the life that had been born from the darkest of nights. In that moment, Jason understood that their story was far from over. The road ahead was still uncertain, still full of twists and turns. But with Max by his side, he knew one thing for sure: they could face anything together. The world might still be a storm, but as long as they had each other, they could weather it. The journey would continue, one step at a time, with love guiding their way. And as the stars twinkled above them, the soft hum of the city in the distance, Jason whispered into the quiet night, "Thank you." Max lifted his head slightly, as if understanding. And then, with a soft whine, he rested his head back on Jason's lap, closing his eyes in contentment. In the silence that followed, Jason realized that sometimes the most profound moments were the ones without words. Moments like this, when the weight of the world was held not in what was said, but in what was shared between them, in the steady, unspoken rhythm of their breath. And for the first time, Jason felt that maybe he wasn't just surviving anymore. Maybe, just maybe, he was finally living. The days grew longer as summer settled in, and with each passing one, Jason and Max found new corners of the world to explore. The air was thick with the scent of grass and wildflowers, the sky endless and blue. In those moments, the weight of the past seemed to fade even more, like the old memories being slowly eroded by the gentle currents of time. The present felt more like a gift than ever before. Max had become more than a companion, he had become a part of Jason's soul. Jason's routines had shifted. His once solitary mornings now filled with the sound of Max's excited whimpers, his afternoons spent at the park or by the river, and his nights wrapped in the quiet of their shared space. Jason's apartment, once so hollow and silent, was now vibrant with life. It was never loud, but it was full in the way that matters, filled with moments, quiet understanding, and the comfort of knowing you weren't alone. But even in this peaceful existence, something was changing inside Jason. He could feel it in the way Max would look up at him, the soft pull of those trusting eyes. Max had helped him heal in ways that no therapist or medication could have. The dog had given him back the ability to hope, to love, and most importantly, to forgive himself. Every time Max's tail wagged with happiness, Jason felt the knots inside him loosen. Every time the dog leaned against him in contentment, Jason felt like he was learning how to live all over again. Still, the fear lingered in the corners of Jason's mind, the fear that something, anything, could come along to ruin this fragile peace. He didn't know how long it would last, this feeling of calm, and sometimes that uncertainty crept back into his chest like a shadow. But he no longer allowed it to control him. He'd come to understand something fundamental: life wasn't about waiting for the perfect moment, the ideal circumstances. It was about finding joy in the mess of it all, in the way the sunlight filtered through the trees, casting golden beams across the ground, in the way Max's fur caught the light as he ran in wild, joyful circles, in the laka that bubbled up inside Jason when Max would roll around in the grass, his playful antics reminding Jason that sometimes it's okay to be a little bit wild, a little bit free. One afternoon, as they walked through a quiet neighborhood, Jason's phone buzzed in his pocket. The familiar weight of it startled him. He hadn't realized how disconnected he had become from the outside world. He pulled it out, glancing at the message. It was from his sister, Mia, a short text asking if he was free a visit the following weekend. Jason stared at the screen, his thumb hovering over the keyboard. It had been months since he'd seen her, months since he'd even thought about reconnecting with his family. And yet, despite the relief that had come from his new life with Max, there was still a part of him that hesitated. Would they understand? Would they see the changes in him? Would they recognize the man who had once been so lost, so consumed by his own darkness? He could feel the familiar tension building in his chest, the doubt creeping in like a quiet visitor he couldn't shake. Max nudged his hand, looking up at him with those soft eyes, as if sensing his unease. Jason paused, taking a deep breath. He looked down at the dog, then back at the message. The hesitation, the fear, all of it seemed so far away now, and yet still present in some corner of his heart. But Max was there, grounding him, reminding him that it was okay to take that step, that it was okay to face the past, to move forward. With a small, almost imperceptible nod, Jason typed a reply. "I'd love that. Let's set something up." As he put the phone back in his pocket, Max let out a soft woof, as if to say, "Good choice." Jason laughed softly, the sound echoing in the still air. Maybe this was what it was all about, moving forward. One small step at a time. No grand gestures, no perfection. Just the quiet act of saying yes to life again. The weekend visit arrived sooner than Jason expected. He stood in front of the door, his heart beating a little faster than usual. The sound of Max's paws clicking on the floor behind him made him smile, but the nerves were still there, coiling tight in his stomach. He hadn't seen his family in a long time, and though the love had always been there, there had been so many years of distance, of silence, of misunderstandings. He wasn't sure who would open that door, whether it would be the man he used to be, or the man he had become. When Mia opened the door, her face broke into a smile, her eyes bright with recognition. She stepped forward, enveloping him in a tight hug, and for a moment, Jason just stood there, breathing in the scent of familiarity, the warmth of family. He felt Max tugging at the leash beside him, eager to meet his aunt, and Jason chuckled, stepping back to give the dog some space. "Well, look at you," Mia said, her eyes soft with surprise. "You look good, Jason. Really good." The words hung in the air, a quiet compliment, but it was the way she said them that struck him the most. It was as if she saw not just the exterior, but the person he had become, someone whole, someone who had weathered storms and come out on the other side. Jason felt a lump rise in his throat, and for the first time in a long time, he realized just how much he had missed this. The connection, the warmth, the family. Max, sensing the emotional shift, looked up at him, his eyes full of understanding, and Jason couldn't help but smile down at the dog. "Meet Max," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "He's been my rock." Max, as if understanding the weight of the moment, sat quietly by Jason's side, his eyes shining with that gentle, unwavering trust. Mia bent down, her hands reaching out to pet the dog, and Jason watched as the years of silence between them seemed to fall away, replaced by the simple act of shared love. He felt a peace he hadn't expected, a sense of reconciliation, not just with his family, but with himself. For the rest of the afternoon they talked, laughed, and shared stories. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of awkwardness, still old wounds that hadn't fully healed. But there was a new kind of openness between them, a space where understanding could grow. And as Jason sat there, watching Max curl up on the floor, content in the presence of his family, he realized that maybe, just maybe, the storm had passed. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to embrace everything that had come since, everything that was waiting ahead. The day ended quietly, with the sun setting in the distance, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. As Jason walked back to his car, with Max trotting happily beside him, he felt a deep sense of peace. Life, he realized, was not about avoiding the storms, but about finding the moments of stillness between them. It was about showing up, even when you were scared, about opening yourself up to love, even when you didn't think you deserved it, about moving forward, one step at a time. And with Max by his side, Jason knew he could face whatever came next. Together, they had already overcome the impossible. The rest was just another chapter in their story. And this time, Jason didn't need to look over his shoulder. He only needed to keep walking forward. The evening had softened into a quiet dusk, the kind of twilight that wraps the world in a calm, muted glow. Jason and Max walked side by side, the familiar rhythm of their steps matching the steady beat of Jason's heart. The weight of the day, of the past few months, settled into a peaceful quiet that he had come to recognize as contentment. They had returned from his sister Mia's house, where something deep had shifted. It wasn't just the conversation or the laughter that had filled the air. It was the feeling of reconnecting, of bridging years of silence with simple, honest moments. Jason looked down at Max, who was walking just ahead, his tail wagging in a steady, almost rhythmic motion. The dog had been his anchor, his constant, through all the uncertainty, all the pain. But today, something had changed in Jason, a shift he hadn't fully expected. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel the need to keep looking over his shoulder, to keep bracing for the next storm. The city around them hummed with life, the distant murmur of traffic and the soft clink of restaurant glasses rising into the night. Yet, for all the movement around him, Jason felt a deep stillness in himself. He wasn't running anymore. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't afraid of being seen for who he was, flaws, imperfections, and all. He had stopped searching for something to save him because, for the first time, he realized he had already been saved. Not by anyone else, but by the small, fragile creature walking beside him, the one who had reminded him how to trust again, how to live again. They passed the park where they often spent their afternoons, where Max had learned to chase after balls and run with unbridled joy. Jason smiled, the memory vivid in his mind. There had been a time when he had believed he was too broken to find peace, too lost to be found. But now, as he watched Max's carefree gait, his heart light and unburdened, Jason understood something he had never before grasped. The storms, the struggles, they were all part of the journey. They didn't define him. They were only chapters, not the entire story. Max stopped for a moment to sniff the air, his ears perked up in the way that always made Jason chuckle. The dog had a way of finding joy in the simplest things, in the rustling of leaves or the smell of fresh grass. Jason crouched down beside him, reaching out to scratch behind his ears. Max's eyes met his, wide and full of trust, and for a moment the world seemed to pause. No words were needed. The connection between them was everything that needed to be said. "Thanks for saving me, buddy," Jason whispered, the words so natural they came without thought. Max tilted his head, as if acknowledging the sentiment, and Jason felt something inside him shift again. He realized that the dog hadn't just brought him back from the edge. He had shown him how to embrace life in all its imperfections, how to move forward without waiting for permission, without fear of what might come next. They continued walking, the sounds of the city growing more distant as they made their way home. Jason felt the familiar warmth of the house awaiting them, but it was more than just the shelter it had once been. It was a home now, a place where they both belonged, a space where love didn't have to be earned. It just was. As they reached the door, Jason paused, his hand resting on the handle. He looked down at Max, who stood by his side, his eyes bright with anticipation. "This is it," Jason whispered to no one but himself. "We're here, and we're going to be okay." The door creaked open, and they stepped inside together, leaving the cool night behind. It was a simple act, but in that moment, Jason realized that they had both made it through the storm. The journey wasn't over, but for the first time, it didn't feel like an endless battle. It felt like a quiet, peaceful beginning. And that was enough. Max trotted in ahead, his tail wagging as he made his way to his favorite spot by the couch. Jason followed him inside, the weight of the world lighter than it had ever been. The door closed softly behind them, but what mattered most was what they had found along the way. The courage to live again, the strength to keep walking, and the unwavering love that had been there all along. And as he settled down on the couch, Max curling up beside him, Jason finally allowed himself to close his eyes, knowing that, for the first time, they were both exactly where they were meant to be. Safe, together, and home.